What's good? It's Woog. Oh my God. Oh man. So it looks like Errol Spence and Terence Crawford have reportedly agreed to all material terms for the Battle of Undisputed. This is more than just the belts on the line. This is basically the best fight that could be made in boxing. It looks like both parties have essentially agreed to the terms. Now, this isn't yet signed, so it's not yet official. They could possibly be making the official announcement in the coming days. I'm assuming if they make the official announcement, it's going to come with like the fight poster ready to go. So we'll see. But it looks like all the sticking points that have prevented this fight from happening, according to ESPN, have now been agreed to, including Terence Crawford making less money in this fight than Errol Spence is set to make. And I'm assuming Errol Spence is probably going to be the A side, even though it seems like if you ask, I would say most fight fans, that most are kind of, at least as far as, I've been hearing and reading, that most people are kind of shading towards Terence Crawford as being the more likely to win this mega fight. But yeah, so it looks like this fight, once it's signed and official, is going to take place on November the 19th in Las Vegas. And Las Vegas, in terms of American venues, is kind of the boxing capital, right? Like, I get New York, Madison Square Garden, the Barclays. There are a lot of other good boxing venues out here. You've got formerly the Staples Center, the Crypto.com Arena, but I get that it doesn't have the same history as Madison Square Garden. But, pretty much since the 80s, Las Vegas has been the mecca of boxing in the United States. That's where, a lot of the iconic Mike Tyson fights were held. That's where the Floyd Mayweather fights were held. Most of the iconic Oscar De La Hoya fights took place in Vegas. So yeah, it's only right that, that this fight doesn't, for instance, take place near, Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, which would be a home crowd advantage for Errol Spence Jr. Las Vegas, is largely the neutral ground for everybody except for pretty much Floyd Mayweather, right? But it's fitting that when Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford finally gets made, that it does take place in Las Vegas. So again, it looks like it's going to be November 19th in Las Vegas. Let's just hope that nothing else, that no other bumps in the road are hit, and that all parties sign, and that we are locked and good to go. This, again, pound for pound, is the best fight that could happen in boxing. I get that, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua would be mega. I get that Tyson Fury versus Usyk would be like, undisputed in the heavyweight division. I get, Canelo versus maybe David Benavidez, or, he's about to fight Golovkin for the third time. But no, this is probably the best fight that has been made in the sport in any division since, what, you could argue maybe Canelo versus Triple G1, maybe even further back. Because here's the thing. You're also getting both of these guys either in or near their prime. Granted, Errol Spence was in that devastating car accident, but he's got 2 wins since. And, he beat Danny Garcia via decision. And then earlier this year, he stopped Yordenis Ugas. Like, most people who thought Errol Spence was going to beat Ugas would have thought that he would do it by decision. But no, he stopped Yordenis Ugas, that was one of the bigger accomplishments for any boxer in any division this year, to stop Yordenis Ugas. And then Terence Crawford also stopped Sean Porter in his last fight. Mega accomplishment. The first person to ever stop Sean Porter. And you could also see that as him kind of one-upping Errol Spence's performance over Sean Porter, where he dropped Sean Porter, but he being Errol Spence, won a very close split decision win against Porter, where you could argue that the knockdown was the difference. So this fight couldn't have come at a better time. Now, one thing that I was becoming concerned about was, as this was kind of, dragging and the fight hasn't been secured, and, 1 year passes, another year passes, and, it's been a few years now that we've been wanting Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford, which, I didn't think this was going to be the case a few years ago, like in, say, 2017, when Errol Spence Jr. won his first share of the welterweight title against Kell Brook, the IBF belt. At that time, Terence Crawford was still fighting in the he had just moved up from lightweight 135 to 140, where he would then go on to become undisputed at 140. But I didn't think that these guys would be, contemporaries in the welterweight division, largely because I would have thought that Errol Spence would have gone up to like 154 or something by now. He's been operating at welterweight for his entire career. But yeah, I didn't look at this as being Terence Crawford's super fight. I thought that, maybe an eventual fight against Lomachenko, which you could say Terence Crawford was always potentially too big for Lomachenko. But this is very fitting. But what I was getting concerned about was that Terence Crawford, if they would have pushed this to say 2023, that now you would be talking about a 36-year-old Terence Crawford. I mean, it's already kind of pushing it as is. Now, I get it. He was sensational in his stoppage win over Sean Porter, which was a very competitive fight. You could argue that Sean Porter gave both Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford their best and most competitive fight. You could argue that. You could also argue, obviously, that, Kell Brook might have given Errol Spence Jr. his, toughest fight. You could argue that, maybe Yorkis Gamboa gave Terence Crawford his toughest fight. Or you could say that maybe Mean Machine might have given Terence Crawford his toughest fight. But yeah, you could also argue that Sean Porter gave both Spence and Crawford their toughest fight. But yeah, I was kind of worried that, Terence Crawford is 34 years old right now. He's going to turn 35 years old later on this month. We're in September of 2022. He's going to turn 35 in a couple of weeks. So by the time he enters the ring, if this fight is made against Errol Spence Jr., Terence Crawford's going to be 35 years old. It's not ideal in terms of where you are, like especially if you're in one of the, the smaller divisions. Welterweight, 35 years old. I mean, that's really pushing it. What was Floyd Mayweather was like 36, 37 years old, right? When he fought Andre Berto in what was then known to be his last professional fight. Yes, he came back and fought technically a pro fight against Conor McGregor, but you get what I'm saying. 35 is really pushing it as is. And I felt that if they extended that one more year, that now you've got a spoiled product going in. You don't have Terence Crawford at his absolute prime anymore. So I'm glad that the fight is happening now because we are this close to that fight being past its expiration date. I can only hope that Terence Crawford is as good and will be as good going into this fight against Errol Spence Jr. as he's been, as he was in his last fight against Sean Porter and, before that. But yeah, 35 years old, you're already kind of pushing it. I'm just glad that we're not getting this fight at a later 35-year-old Terence Crawford where he's about to turn 36 or something like that. But yeah, I was really worried about this fight not being made, especially because we just got on the PBC side, we just got Andy Ruiz versus Luis Ortiz, and I was thinking that would be a perfect opportunity to make the official announcement of Spence versus Crawford. Well, it didn't happen during that pay-per-view broadcast. And so I'm thinking like, damn, like somebody's dropping the ball here, right? But then I'm thinking, wait, maybe they do it on the, during the Deontay Wilder versus Robert Helenius pay-per-view broadcast. But then I was thinking, well, but wait a second. Deontay Wilder versus Robert Helenius is taking place on October 15th. So you can't wait that long if you're planning to have this fight because, people were talking about Spence versus Crawford taking place in November. So I was thinking, you can't announce it in mid-October if you're going for even if it's late November that you're planning on having the fight. You can't give a fight of this magnitude just like 5 to 6 weeks of promotion. No, this is one of those super fights where you're going to need to give it a full 2 months of promotion. So if they were going to wait for, Wilder versus Helenius to make the announcement, then you're not talking about a November fight. You're talking about a December fight at the earliest. So that didn't seem like it was going to work out. So I guess it makes sense. We knew that this fight would have to be made like within this like next couple of weeks like time span for it to get the full promotional duration that it deserves, and that would probably lend to the best money generated altogether if you were going to plan for a November fight. So yeah, I'm just elated that it looks like It's not official, but it looks like Spence versus Crawford is going to go down. And I'm saying it, Spence versus Crawford, assuming, again, that Errol Spence is the A side here. He's got 3 of the 4 titles at welterweight. I get that, Terence Crawford is a 3-division champion, still undefeated, like Errol Spence Jr. But yeah, I can't wait to do, first of all, when they make this official, I'm going to come back and I'm going to do an early thoughts video on this fight. And obviously, as we near the fight date, I'm going to do a full preview and then probably a live chat talking all things Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. But yeah, my earliest of thoughts, and of course, we've all thought about this fight for some time, right? But, I'm thinking, throughout their career, in full disclosure, I've probably been a bigger Errol Spence fan than I have a Terence Crawford fan. Like, I remember watching Terence Crawford back when he was at lightweight, fighting the likes of Breidis Prescott. And I always saw Crawford as being impressive. And I was one of those fans who was saying, hey, yeah, I want to get on the Terence Crawford thing early. I want to get aware of how good he can be. So then you could, just see somebody's their greatness unfold, basically. And so I saw him as being a very good fighter, maybe a potentially great fighter, but I didn't at the time when he was at lightweight, I didn't know he was going to be like a special fighter. I didn't see him as being that good. I thought that he should beat, Victor Postal, who was his toughest 140-pound opponent. I thought, yeah, Crawford's probably going to beat Victor Postal, and I had a lot of admiration and respect for Postal, especially after he stopped Lucas Matisse. But again, I didn't know that Terence Crawford was going to then go to 147 and, eventually stop Kell Brook, Amir Khan, Sean Porter. Are you kidding me? So Terence Crawford has exceeded all of my expectations, but the whole time leading up to where we are now, if you would have asked me at any step along the way who would win between Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford, I would have probably said Errol Spence Jr. But there's something to be said about the tricky timing and about the adaptability of Terence Crawford, like the mid-flight adjustments that he makes, and just that off-rhythm punch that he can deliver where the opponent least expects it, like Kell Brook when Crawford switched to southpaw, as he often does, and hit him with the lead right hand, just totally off-rhythm, caught Kell Brook at the worst time, sent his equilibrium all off, and the fight was basically over within seconds of that punch landing. I just feel like Errol Spence, for as good as a physical fighter as he is, and as good as a boxing IQ as he has, and as good as a technical fighter. I mean, we saw him against Mikey Garcia, Danny Garcia. We've seen him win fights behind jabs, and we've seen him be the patient hunter that could take you out, like he did with Yordenis Ugas, like he did eventually with Kell Brook, right? We've seen variations of his, fight-by-fight performance. I mean, we saw how he obliterated a then still very good Chris Algieri way back in 2016. I mean, he stopped Leonard Bundu at the time when Leonard Bundu's only loss was a decision against Prime Keith Thurman. So Errol Spence, I saw him as being special way before I saw Terence Crawford as being special. But as physical and as good as Errol Spence has been and continues to be, and he's defied the odds. Like, I had big questions when he got in that huge car accident, whether he would ever be the same. Some people, by the way, would still argue that he's not the same and hasn't been the same. I think he's more or less the same. And I think, in some ways, he's even better than he might have been, before the accident. There's no way of really ever knowing that unless, he totally just degraded from that point. But he hasn't degraded. He's beaten Danny Garcia and Yordenis Ugas. So I think we're still, dealing with a A+ level operator in Errol Spence Jr. But as good as he has been, there's something to be said about the instinct of Terence Crawford. And I just mean that, if one of these guys was going to hit the other with a 1, 2, 3 shot kill, who is it going to be? I think that you would have to lean Terence Crawford. Like, if this fight gets into, like a rhythm, and say it's an interesting fight that's materializing, say you've got a couple of swing rounds, a couple, slight ebbs and flows, but nothing dramatic. Who's more likely going to be the person who just kind of turns things around dramatically within a few punches and just turns the whole fight up on its head? I see Terence Crawford as being that guy. So I feel like it will have to be a battle of attrition where Errol Spence Jr. eventually works Terence Crawford over the course of several rounds. Whereas I feel like at any step along the way, especially when you start getting into the middle rounds, or maybe even before. That's the thing about Crawford. I never know what to expect anymore. Is he going to finish him in the third round or fourth round the way that he did with, Kell Brook when he switched to southpaw in the third and then finished him in the fourth? Or is this going to go several rounds and then maybe in the 10th or 11th, in a fight that could be going either way on the scorecards, or even, Errol Spence being in the lead? That's another thing. If Terence Crawford is winning this fight, through 6 rounds, I don't see Errol Spence doing something different necessarily to flip the fight on its head, even though you could say Kell Brook was winning some of those early rounds against Spence, and Spence still just kind of slowly melted Kell Brook, right? I mean, he's broken multiple guys' faces. He broke, Ugas's face. He broke Kell Brook's face. He damages his opponents. And Mikey Garcia was never really the same. It's almost like that fight with Errol Spence where Mikey Garcia was daring to be great, fighting in a weight class he really never had any real business competing in, even though, yes, he did beat Jesse Vargas. Mikey Garcia's, it seems like his fighting spirit was broken in that dominating loss at the hands of Errol Spence Jr. So Errol Spence Jr. will knock you out. He can knock you out. He could TKO you. He could put you to sleep like he did Leonard Bundu. Or he could just damage you round over round, where his work rate is just too much to endure. But I feel like one of the differences between these two is you could have a fight where Errol Spence is winning. You could have a fight where Terence Crawford is winning. And even if Errol Spence is up, say 5 rounds to 3, and we're in the 9th round, at any moment, I get the impression that Terence Crawford could change everything about the fight with just a few of the perfectly timed and placed punches. So even though I've been kind of, I wouldn't say team Errol Spence, but I would have answered your question, who would win between these two, with Errol Spence. I've been that the whole ride, but in these last couple performances from Terence Crawford, I'm kind of leaning Terence Crawford, but I'm going to take a deeper look in analyzing this as this fight gets made official, and then we can start really, really analyzing and thinking of how this fight might play out. And again, I'm going to do multiple, early thoughts, preview videos leading up to this fight, but right now my gut is kind of telling me Terence Crawford, and it's not only saying that, but I'm even thinking Terence Crawford via either mid or late round stoppage. I almost feel like I can't believe I'm saying that, but that's kind of where my gut is leaning early on this one. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are, what your earliest thoughts are on Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford. Again, it's not yet official at the time of this recording, but it looks like, an official announcement might be just around the corner, according to reports. So let's just stay hopeful, and then we could celebrate once they make this fight official. When they made Errol Spence versus Manny Pacquiao, it was pretty heartbreaking when that fight got canceled, mid 2021, because that was kind of that superstar breakout moment that Errol Spence needed. He's been a great fighter. I still have Errol Spence Jr. on my personal pound for pound list. I still have Errol Spence Jr. at 2 and Terence Crawford at 3. I feel like most people have Terence Crawford above Errol Spence Jr., but his dominion, his being Errol Spence's dominion over the welterweight division over the past few years, and the way and his method of victory, fight over fight over the past, you could say 7 years, basically from the time he started beating guys like Samuel Vargas and Phil Lo Greco and Chris Van Heerden. From that point on, I feel like Errol Spence Jr. has just been nothing short of absolute elite. And so, yeah, I still have Errol Spence Jr. number 2 on my pound for pound list. For those wondering, I actually still have Canelo Alvarez, and that's a whole nother discussion, but I still have him as my number 1 pound for pound fighter in the sport. But yeah, let me know what you think about Spence versus Crawford, your earliest thoughts. Let's hope that they make it. And yeah, who are you picking at this stage? Again, it's early. We have a lot of time to discuss these things. But yeah, who are you going with and how? Please let me know in the comments. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.